Or I'm trying to finish a piece of okra really quickly.
You have okra Pop-Tarts?
No, just pickled okra.
Oh, that's funny because right before the show, I was telling Wyatt about my new idea for cornbread Pop-Tarts.
Those would actually probably go over good. At least up north.
He said it sounded gross, but I don't know.
Yeah, he's a kid. Anyway, good evening, everybody. Happy Monday.
Yeah.
Happy Monday. Go ahead, Faversham.
Faversham.
We had a little bit of a lag on our end. I can hear it. Probably from me. But before we get started, the views and opinions expressed in this program are not necessarily those of the SCV, any division, brigade, camp, or other subsidiaries, strictly of those of us who are expressing them. I am trying to figure out if I can hop on my personal hotspot and see if that'll give me a better boosted signal. I doubt it, though. Really quickly looking at sorry about that. Glitched out there for a second. Can y'all hear me?
I can.
Okay. Ron Rogers, good evening. Harrison, we miss you. But what does a moose got to do to get a spatula? You got to earn it. Dr. Sandy Mitchum, good evening. Jimmy Hill, how are you? Jack DuPont, glad to see everybody in. Gerald Nelson, Michael C. Hardy, Stephen Washburn, David Pope, good evening. We're just talking about you before the Am I really frozen, Harrison, or are you messing with me? Because if you're messing with me and I'm not frozen, I'm going to track you down and hit you with the spatula.
Harrison's frozen.
No, he's saying that I'm frozen.
Yeah, well, I didn't mean impertinence to the chat. I mean just in general.
Oh, okay. I love how when we talk before the show, neither one of us mentioned what we were wearing, and we're both wearing yellow shirts.
And you know what? This is the only yellow shirt I've ever had in my entire lifetime, and I have no idea where it came from.
Yeah, pretty much the same. Well, except I know where mine came from. But if I told you, I'd have to throw something at you. Anyway, well, Carl, happy third Monday of the month, and happy birthday to Todd Owens. Sorry, Todd, I forgot your last name there for a second.
Was it his birthday?
Today is his birthday.
How about that?
Yep.
Well, I hope that I look as good at 77 as he does.
In a bowler hat or without the bowler hat?
Either way.
Not bowler, boater, excuse me. The boater hat, the straw hat. He doesn't watch us anymore, so anyway.
No, so I can pick on him all I want.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, tonight we have a very interesting topic, or two topics. It's going to be one of those episodes you really need to put on your thinking cap for, because Carl is going to be running back and forth off screen, and when he's off screen, I'm going to be filling in on the second half of the topic. So if you see the title of the episode, Secession and Spatulas, Carl's going to talk about secession. I'm going to talk about spatulas while he's having to run off screen. We'll start?
There should be nothing confusing about this.
Well,
I mean, if there were ever two topics that go as hand in hand, I don't know what they could possibly be. I mean, there was the famous speech that General Lee made, that in whose defense alone will I ever again draw my spatula.
Spatula, exactly. Or Patrick Henry when he stood up in front of the House of Burgesses with his spatula in hand, give me liberty or give me death.
Someday we're going to have to tell everybody where the spatula came from, where this story came from. So there's more than 7 of us in the entire world that know what we're all laughing about. So there you
go. Yeah. But anyway, so, well, you know what we need, Carl? We need a section of a timeline in the museum. Speaking of timelines in the museum, that gets us to our secession area portion of tonight's conversation. So, Carl, kick it off.
All right. Well, as usual, Carl is a little bit behind on everything. Yeah, people read some of the stuff I post on Facebook and they think that I like writing. I actually don't. I hate it. And the stuff that it's not, that I hate the discussion. It's just, I don't like having to think so much, and sit there and type it out, but, and try to make it make sense in written word. But, anything I post on Facebook, generally it's, kind of an intemperate thought that just sort of comes off the top of my head. So I don't have to think about it. I don't mind doing that. But anyway, long story short, I had told Jimmy Hill, I don't know how many months ago, that I would write a section on secession in general. I think that past Commander-in-Chief Sullivan wrote a section for the museum on South Carolina secession in particular. I was going to do one just on secession in general as an American concept. And so finally, after him, after Jimmy kind of poking and prodding me a little bit here and there, I finally got around to it. I'm not finished with it. But I started writing it. I got about 4 pages in and realized, there are so many directions I could go on this. You've got the legal in American law, the constitutional version of it. You've also got the philosophical version of it, and either of those 2 things can go in so many different directions, and it's been kind of a little bit of a challenge to try to tie it all together. And I got to thinking about it today, really, if you wanted to just kind of end the discussion and make it as simple as possible, you could just, as with a lot of other things, go back to Thomas Jefferson. What right does one generation have to bind a future yet unborn generation into a society that they may or may not wish to be a part of? That was the Jeffersonian view. And so you're talking 70 some odd years after ratification of the Constitution, and the North telling the South, you cannot leave. By what right could they force anybody philosophically? By what right did they have to force the Southern states that wish to depart into a union that they no longer wish to be a part of? And that in and of itself was about as cold-blooded a rejection of the Jeffersonian tradition as you could imagine. Are you frozen again, or just staring at
me?
Me?
I am actually looking something up for a little bit later on in the show. The Texas Republican Party platform. Not to be biased by anything, but when we talk later on about, as we wane on into the episode, I found out that that's actually part of putting it to a referendum of the people of Texas. the right to secede from the federal government is actually in the Republican Party platform in Texas. I was going to read those sections, specifically Section 30, and I'm trying to find the other one. It's in the 200s.
Well, it was actually and most people watching this, at least most of our members watching this know this, it was also in the ratification instruments of 3 states, New York, Rhode Island, and Virginia. They joined, and understand language and words change definition, they change meaning over time. In the time of the framing and ratification of the Constitution, the word secession was not yet a word. They called it scission, but secession was not a word. So in the ratification instruments of the 3 states that I named, they reserve the right to reassume what we call the resumption clauses, all delegated powers. Okay, so if you're Rhode Island and we have delegated these powers to this general government, and all of a sudden we resume them, what have we done? We've seceded. In other words, we tell them, you no longer have any legal dominion or any, our relationship has ended. So you had 3 states that ratified on that condition. What Rhode Island, I think it was Rhode Island or New York, one of them said, they left it pretty cut and dried that if the new government affects the happiness, or if secession, if resumption should be to the happiness of our people, we reserve the right to leave, to do so. Virginia was a little bit more in depth by that. I mean, I think they were 2 sentences. It was if the new government should be perverted to our injury or oppression, and so they based it on that. So keep in mind, you had 13 states ratifying at the time, and they all came in on an equal footing, as would, by original design, any new states that came into the Union in the future. And I want to digress from that here in a minute, but every new state that came into the Union in the future came in on the same footing as the equal 13. So when these 3 states said, we're going to join under these conditions, and those conditions were accepted, then they became universal to every state, the other states, the other 10 states coming into the Union, and the other states that would come into the future. The part I wanted to digress on is that there is I hear this all the time, that, well, the future states coming into the Union were created by the Union. No, they were not. That is absolutely 1,000% incorrect. They were not. They were admitted into the Union once they had attained statehood on their own, meaning that they had a constitution and a republican form of government and had met the criteria for admittance into the Union, then they were allowed into the Union. But the United States government never created anything in terms of a state or a state government. That is absolutely bogus.
Well, I mean, the federal government has no right to dictate what type of laws, besides it being a Republican form of government, that a state can have.
They do. They have limited jurisdiction there under Article 1, Section 10. I believe it's Article 1, Section 10 that prevents the states from doing certain things, such as forming a union within the Union.
Right.
Or in terms of enacting ex post facto laws, which means laws that would prosecute something in the past. That's another interesting part of this discussion, by the way. When we get a little farther along, I may, if you remind me, I'll bring that up. But there were limitations within the Constitution on the states, but those limitations were agreed upon by the states and delegated to the general government. The general government in and of itself has no authority outside of its own delegated powers and the prohibitions on the states as enumerated within the Constitution, though. Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to clarify that.
That's fine. I'm taking an early Pop-Tart break tonight.
You better have one ready to go at 7:37, which is, not long. I got a whole box. You're good, man.
Yeah.
You're good. The son of Harold Philpott would be proud.
He should be. But no, the what I was mainly getting at too is Louisiana being weird with their Napoleonic Code. Louisiana is a Republican form of government, but still the individual laws of that state vary from, just crossing over one river.
Yeah. Well, and that's what we mean by self-government. The concept of the Union is very simple. It is that there were certain things, there were certain powers that the states realized we would be think of in terms of common defense or in foreign commerce, that we would be better off. It would be better in our interest to approach these things as a united body. But in all other cases, we need to govern our own affairs because of the distinct cultures that existed from one state to the next. Okay, and the easiest example of this that I can give is the concept of liberty. Liberty does not mean the same thing in New England culture, Puritan culture, that it does in Cavalier culture or Scots-Irish culture. They're two different things. In the South, as we think of it today, you're predominantly, mostly talking, I think, about kind of a melding together of Cavalier and Scots-Irish culture. And in those cultures, liberty was an individual thing. In the North and in the deep North, New England, liberty was a communal construct. And you see that even today. Okay, so if we take these sections and bind them together, and then we're going to have this one monolithic central entity that's going to dictate to the entire union of states, you must do this, you must do that. Well, whose view are those laws and those edicts going to be based on? It would not work. And as we can see plainly today, it does not work. What you have is this continual fight back and forth between the one party on the left and the conservative party, in quotes, on the other left. We got two leftist parties going back and forth, and you, me, and others who adhere to the true American, the Jeffersonian tradition, we're left without representation and no voice. Okay, and that is truly what the general or what the Confederate soldier fought to prevent. Okay, so that's another aspect of secession. But look at the legal aspects in terms of, was it legal? The most basic answer there is, again, going back to Article 1, Section 10, that was the article and section of the Constitution which told the states what you cannot do. All right, so secession was never mentioned there to begin with, number one. Number two, there was no power delegated under Article 1, Section 8 telling Congress what its power was or powers were. There's nothing there delegating to them the authority to prevent secession. Therefore, since secession is not mentioned as either being prohibited to the states nor prohibiting secession being delegated to the general government, it falls under, guess what? the
10th Amendment,
which states that the powers delegated to the United States are reserved, those that are clearly. I'm butchering this because I'm going off memory, but are those that are clearly delegated, and the ones that are not delegated there are reserved to the states or the people respectively. So because it wasn't there, because there was nothing there preventing the states nor empowering the federal government from preventing secession, under the Constitution, on the original intent, secession was 100% legal, period.
Yeah, and if you want a good modernist example somewhat of the powers being delegated to the states, look back at the Dobbs case. And granted, Supreme Court's, that's a totally another episode, but the court did rule that, that one particular issue falls under the 10th Amendment, that it's left up to the states or the people.
Yeah, and that was the first case in modern memory that the Supreme Court got right. And if you go look at the reading of it, I think they actually got it and to some degree right for a lot of the wrong reasons, But at least it came back to the states. But if you take the Jeffersonian approach, if we look at the Dobbs case, the Jeffersonian approach, the real question is, why did we wait on the Supreme Court to render an opinion?
Yeah. I mean,
why not nullify it? Why not have the states tell the federal government, you don't have any authority there. Sorry, you didn't have any authority to hear the case, much less to render an opinion or a judgment on it. But that again is those are the fruits of Lincoln's victory. The states abdicated their role in the process. I've asked this question to various people before, but the Supreme Court is a branch. It's a judicial branch, makes up the judicial branch of the general government. Okay, so there are three branches of general government: executive, legislative, and judicial. It is the weakest branch. Now, if the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of constitutionality, what you're telling me is that the founding generation created a general government and gave it the authority to determine the limits of its own powers. How stupid would that generation have had to have been, being that they had just left an oppressive government and then turned around and created another one from which A, there was no escape, and B, their own court could determine the limitations of their powers.
Well, I believe it was, it may have been Franklin, but it's paraphrased in the movie The Patriot. Why trade one tyrant 3,000 miles away for 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away?
Yeah, valid point. And that came up. I mean, not that exact discussion, but that was sort of the argument between the proponents and the opponents of the Constitution was that we were given too much authority to this new government. We were giving them a standing army, and then we're giving them control of the purse strings. And so, but you had people like Madison, Hamilton, James Wilson, others that were proponents and nationalist or monarchist, depending on which one you talk. Hamilton, could be easily labeled a monarchist, but they were assuring when they went back and spoke to their own states that no, that's not going to happen. It can't, because those three to name, Madison, Wilson, and Hamilton, actually argued against a Bill of Rights, as did Roger Sherman of Connecticut. actually argued against the Bill of Rights on the premise that the government can only do specifically what we delegated, meaning those 18 things under Article 1.
Well, would you consider, just really quickly off topic, but would you consider Hamilton a monarchist or, more in favor of oligarchy?
Well, every government that we can name throughout the history of the world that we call a dictatorship has actually been an oligarchy. All of them.
Yeah.
Because there's no way that one man, the dictator, can control thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people without some oligarchical structure that assists him in that. You see my point?
Yeah.
So I would suggest that Hamilton was both.
Okay.
He did say, if I'm not mistaken, in the Philadelphia Convention, that you might as well go ahead and create the office of a king because you're going to wind up with one anyway. And guess what? We did.
We have one, yeah. Well, now it's more of an emperor, but.
Well, the only thing separating him, and thank God for Franklin Roosevelt in this regard, because Franklin Roosevelt's fourth term, got term limits on the president. Otherwise, you might still have, there'd be no limitations. But between the elections and the every 4 years and the term limits to 2 terms, if it weren't for those 2 things, and Hamilton wanted he actually called for a perpetual presidency, a president that would be elected and he would hold office for life. By the way, if he had won that argument, Jimmy Carter would still be your president.
Yeah.
And we can debate back and forth on whether that's a bad or good thing, but I think we can talk about how bad Carter was, but I think every president since him has been worse.
So anyway, well, really quickly, while you're before we move on, it's sections 225 and section 30 deal with. Let me go back up to section 30 really quickly, and I'll come back down to 225. And again, this is within, and this kind of goes back to what the Kennedy twins wrote in the book. Rules.
Hey, hold that thought 1 second. I'll be right back. Rib check.
Okay. Well, you check your ribs. I'll go ahead and do this. Catch it on the replay. But in Dixie Rising, they talk about getting in with your agents of influences in the area, and just the peaceful secession movement that has happened all across since the fall of Ireland, the fall of the Iron Curtain, everything like that. But again, Texas GOP platform number 33 is state sovereignty. And it reads like this. Pursuant to Article 1, Section 1 of the Texas Constitution, the federal government has impaired our right of local self-government. Therefore, federally mandated legislation that infringes upon the 10th Amendment rights of Texas shall be ignored, opposed, refused, and nullified. Texas retains the right to secede from the United States, and the Texas legislature should be called upon to pass a referendum consistent thereto. And we go on back down to 250. Equal parenting. Also, fun fact, if any of y'all are interested, look at section 201 of this platform as well that deals with historical monuments. And they specify the Confederate monuments of Texas that they should be protected from removal or defacement. So check that out. That's 201. But then when you get to 250, almost there. Next page. Nope, let me go back. No, wasn't 250. Dang it. Have to refind it. It's a good portion in there about unelected bureaucrats. Sexual harassment, government authority, gun-free zones, Texas. Oh, 225. Excuse me, 225. We urge the Texas legislature to pass bill in its next session requiring a referendum in the 2023 general election for the people of Texas to determine whether or not the state of Texas should reassert its status as an independent nation. So very interesting things very interesting things that are in the Texas GOP platform. Also, if you go on the 10th Amendment Center, and I can find that article and post it later, the state of, or maybe it wasn't the 10th Amendment Center that originally posted it, maybe the Wikipedia article that takes you to the link, but the state of Georgia passed a resolution a couple of years ago essentially saying that they would nullify any federal, or nullify, not abide by any federal laws. And they did a lot of citing out of Jefferson's, was it the Kentucky resolutions, Virginia resolutions? I'm getting all mixed up here on my notes.
Jefferson wrote anonymously, by the way, the Kentucky resolution, and Madison wrote the Virginia resolutions. And at the time, I believe, don't quote me, I believe Jefferson was vice president, and Madison, Jefferson was vice president. Madison was Secretary of State. They did so anonymously because they would have otherwise potentially been indicted under the Sedition Acts that Adams had signed off on. So they admitted years later that they had written them, but yeah. So,
but the Georgia State Assembly, like I said, a couple of years ago, passed that resolution. You can easily find that resolution online. If I can find it later on, I'll try to post it on the page. But if we want to be any type of influence, we need to look at that wording, especially the 201 about historical monuments or war memorials. In that Texas GOP platform I've been talking about, not endorsing any party or belief or disclaimer and all that other stuff that's going on at the bottom, but at least for our issue, look at that. And then I just found it interesting that in two spots of their platform that they are calling for Texit, so to speak, or at least turning it back over to the people, which is what the 10th Amendment says to ratify. And if you remember in Gods and Generals, just for those that need a mental or something out of modern media, for lack of a better term, to try to trigger your mind in. If you're watching there's a portion where they're standing outside of a telegraph office, and they talk about the ratification of secession came back in, or the tally on that. And every state, they had a secession convention, and the delegates there voted for secession, at least in the Confederate states. But it will still had to be ratified by the people of that state, whether they wanted to leave the Union or not. Back over to Carl.
Well, it was voted on in convention. And what that means, it was not a Democratic vote. It was a Republican vote. Okay, so the same way that the U.S. Constitution was framed and ratified by convention, meaning that portions of the country, or portions of the state, each individual state, I should say, elected delegates and sent them to convention to represent their views. That way you had, in Alabama, you had 100 delegates, and secession was ratified or voted in a vote of 39-61. Okay, so the delegates to the convention were chosen by a certain region. I don't know exactly how they divided it up in Alabama or various other places, but it was not a matter of the legislature saying, no, we vote to secede. The legislature had no say so in it. It was a direct Republican approach to the vote itself through elected delegates. Did I catch you off guard there?
No, but it is
still washing down Pop-Tarts.
Well, the guys are on the break now, don't know where they've gone to. Let's go to the kitchen and get ourselves a treat.
$7:35, time for a Pop-Tart break.
I think 7:37 is the proper time, actually.
I think we had to round it down because of daylight savings time and the fact that he's in Canada.
Yeah.
Brian, Winton says, at least I believe he's talking about the portion of the GOP platform and the stuff that I was talking about in Texas. He's saying that they won't. Today's states are shackled by mandates and regulations, strangled by illegal federal court rulings, bribed by federal dollars, stolen from the states, and held as vassals by threat of force, besides urban centers in states that have populations and incentive to remain part of the national funding mechanism. That is all true. The fact that the South, or at least definitely the South, but the fact that the federal government has grown so much, is it a possibility for any type of modern movement? Who knows? It is left up to the people to decide and everything like that. But the fact that there is a state that is standing up and at least trying to reassert its independence in this modern, neo-Bolshevik, any other terms Carl wants to throw out there, day and age that we're living is hope, and at least a playbook, so to speak, for what other states can do. In fact, there's an article that came out a couple of weeks ago that I was looking at where they talk about secession and things like that. Nationally, excuse me, nationally, it's within a vast majority of the, at least on the left, right, center, the y-axis of political, or x-axis, whichever it is, of the political spectrum, it is pretty well split that a number of Democrats and a number of Republicans, and it's growing more and more, do favor going ahead and splitting the nation along political ideological lines. So,
well, and I'm going to say this. That's the one thing that gives me hope, because I remember it was about 2000, 2001, 2002, in that general time frame, when I discovered the concept of state sovereignty, nullification, secession, all these things. Up until that time, I had been an ardent nationalist. I'm embarrassed to say it now, but I held the view that, good thing the North won. Otherwise, the United States would have been demolished. There wouldn't have. Thank God for, that's stupid. I was stupid, and started reading books on the founding of the country, and I read various opinion pieces, but most of those, like Walter Williams and various others, pushed me towards going back to reading original sources. Brian McClanahan played a big role in that years later, because he was pointing me to the sources to read, such as the state ratification debates. But ultimately in the early 2000s, I reached the conclusion that, state sovereignty makes sense. And I realized that the South had not fought for what I had been told it fought for all of my life. And I realized, I've been fed a bunch of garbage, a bunch of crap. And the Jeffersonian philosophy, as I came to understand it, it just made so much more sense to me. And I also, one of the biggest realizations was these talking heads that I so greatly admired, like Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and various others, they really didn't know what the H they were talking about. They don't. And Levin, Mark Levin is, worse. Now you got PragerU and David Barton and these other clowns out there selling this nationalist agenda and, accusing our ancestors of being traitors. Well, look, if you walk up to me and say, the Confederate soldier was a traitor, you can say that in the plainest English that you can imagine. But what I just heard was you're saying I'm a moron, okay? Because you don't know what you're talking about. You have obviously, clearly, thoroughly been miseducated in the founding of the country. And I get into the secession, write-up panel for the museum, which I want to get back to, because that kind of go ahead.
Get back to that. I've got to jump off for a quick second and grab the elevator for my laptop because it's starting to overheat. So I'll be right back. You keep talking.
Okay. The big point that I would really emphasize is going back to what I said earlier. Years ago, when Brian McClanahan came out with his first book, which was the Politically Incorrect Guide to the Founding Fathers, I think that was 2008, 2009. And I emailed him, and he and I ultimately got to be friends, and I've had him speak at several events, and he's been a big influence on me from a research and a historical standpoint. And he always told me it's not what I say in my books, it's what they said. That's all that's what he's doing in his books, is he's taking you back to primary sources and saying, my opinion doesn't matter. This is what they said. And that was kind of the approach that Jimmy Hill and I, when Jimmy took chairmanship of this committee to do the timeline for the museum, he and I had discussed it actually years ago as we were putting on, doing something else, another program that we worked on. But we agreed we need to talk about subjects, even if they're uncomfortable, like slavery, like treason, and we need to give the Southern view of these things, not run from them. But we need to be able to back up what we're saying with primary sources. And when you go back to the primary source material that put the Union together, either whether you're going from a historical approach or a philosophical approach, either one, you absolutely 100% cannot point to me any evidence that secession was illegal. It was not then. It is not now. It may have, the concept may have been conquered by force, but force is not a legal concept. Force is just force. That's like saying, Connor and I are having a discussion. He says the sky is blue. I say the sky is purple. He beats me up. And I have to accept the idea, oh, well, he's right, the sky's blue. No, the sky's purple. The fact is the sky is what color it is. I may have mangled that whole analogy. But the point is that, force does not change the outcome of anything. And Lincoln's, demolishment of the South, crushing the, Jeffersonianism under Hill, does not change the fact that from a legal and philosophical standpoint, the South was 100% within their, justified.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't remember who made the argument. It may have been you, it may have been, or analogy, maybe you, it may have been Ron Walters. But the fact that, it's forces beating the wife to stay in the marriage. She
Yeah, I
wants
think
to leave.
Tom P. Lorenzo actually came up with that analogy. Ron or I may have, we may have co-opted it, but it's a great analogy.
Use that analogy instead of purple sky.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a Jimi Hendrix moment there. Sorry, excuse me. But the only thing, and I got I got hooked into a radio debate, which I was not told ahead of time it was going to be a debate, but the Alabama State University in Montgomery called me several years ago and asked me to come on as a guest. They wanted to understand the SCV position. This was 2015, I think, 2016 maybe. The SCV position on the battle flag. So I thought it was going to be just me coming on. I should have known better. And I got on there, and they had a professor of social sciences, I believe it was, that they actually had as my opponent. He was there to disavow everything I said. Well, I got a really good bird's eye view of the inside of our education system, where constitutionalism and all these topics are discussed, because this guy was dumb as a brick. He tried telling me that, and I've actually got a recording of this somewhere because it's kind of funny. They sent me a recording of it because somebody had asked me if I had it, a recording. So anyway, he said, "Oh, no, you're wrong. The federal courts came along and determined that secession was illegal. And if you'll refer to Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, it says that that federal laws are supreme over state laws." I said, "No, sir, it does not say that." He says, "You go read Article 6. And I told him, I said, "I don't have to go read it. I'll quote it to you. It says, 'This Constitution and the laws made in pursuance thereof are the supreme law of the land.'" And Hamilton explained that in the New York Convention, that yes, federal laws are supreme with regard to the delegated powers within the Constitution, because the states agreed on that. But wherever any power is not delegated to the federal government nor prohibited by the Constitution to the states, it is reserved to the states, and secession is nowhere mentioned that way. The federal government had no authority on the issue of secession, and its laws and its edicts were not supreme. And he said, "Oh, no, you're confused." But that's what it says, period. Of course, they cut me off and we ran out of time there.
Right.
He got the last word on it. So, but I don't know what it is about these college professors who cannot comprehend "in pursuance thereof." 3 simple words, and every one of them will leave that out.
Well, I mean, it's just like quoting the Bible to fit your own narrative. I mean, it's the same thing. They think it gives them a moral superiority, and if you hold your head just right, it kind of looks like you have a spinning halo. Anyway,
I do. You've never seen that before?
No, I've never noticed that before. somebody just texted me about that from Florida. But I digress. If secession was, just this god awful, illegal, immoral, shouldn't have happened, then why celebrate the 4th of July? I mean, that's the question I've been asking everybody. Whenever there was a meme that came out a couple of years ago that I think I shared on my Instagram. I may can find it later. But the Declaration of Independence is the same thing as the Ordinance of Secession from other states.
Well, certain states, and I believe Alabama was one of them. Well, only how many, Ron, Kennedy, I know, Donnie, one of y'all can answer me on this. I believe only 5 out of 13, maybe 4, I think it was 5, issued declarations of causes. Now, there were 8 others that issued ordinances of secession. Of course, a couple of those did that under occupation, like Missouri. But there were, Alabama, I believe, was one of them that said, we need no declaration of causes. We have it. It was codified in 1776. There's our justification. Now, how were they wrong? And if you really want to, like I said, if you really want to go back to primary sources, and I've used this numerous times when people say, oh no, that once the states joined the Union, they were locked in forever. And I'll reply with, so what you're trying to tell me is that the same people, the same generation of people who fought for 8 years to win their independence from a government that they believed had grown tyrannical, then they turned around and created a government from which there was no escape. You must think our founding generation were idiots.
I mean, heck, there was enough opposition in the Continental Congress when it was people began saying that we would ally with France against Great Britain because they thought we would be taking off the yoke of the English crown and putting on the yoke of the French.
Yeah, there was and that's another thing. You have these faux, however you pronounce that, F-A-U-X. Northern mythologists masquerading as historians out there. I could name several of them that would like. In fact, there was an entire series done on this called Founding Brothers by Joseph Ellis, who is, if you buy his books, in my opinion, they make a great fire starter. But Founding Brothers, the idea that, on one glorious day, all of our founders got together and they all agreed. Of course, they had their slight differences and everything, but they all agreed that, the Articles of Confederation were too weak and we needed a strong central government to control the population. Well, that's a bunch of baloney. That's all a bunch of garbage. Ratification was achieved, and it's another thing. State sovereignty was not uniquely Southern. It is an American principle until parts of America were overrun and become, came to be dominated by Yankees. But ratification was attained in the state of New York, margin of 3 votes. 3. And guess what? The dissenting side was opposing that the central government would be too strong and it would erode the rights of the state. They wanted self-government. Self-government is an American principle. Anybody who stands in opposition to self-government of the states is standing on a platform of un-Americanism, period.
Well, and the ideology of, and that's what some people can argue is that, we lived in a, 18-mile world during that time. Everybody, you never went more than 18 miles from your home. And the government that affected your life the most was the federal government, or not the federal government, your state and local government, particularly your local government. But now that with modern advancements that we've had since the 1950s, now is a good time for us to have a more centralized government. But they don't realize that still your local government at home, whether it's county, city, parish, whatever, affects your life 10 times more than what the federal government does. I was having a talk with a friend of mine. He used to he was a county board of supervisor, as well as was a city employee for several years. And, he and I were talking about the 4th of July coming up. And I said, well, you realize that where you live, you can't shoot fireworks in your home outside of your backyard. Well, that's not a federal thing, but that's something that was implemented by his local government that affects his life more than anything the federal government does besides taxes.
Sure. Well, taxes and foreign wars. And
Yeah.
I mean, if you believe the South was wrong, you believe that a government that dominates every aspect of your life, down to how much water your toilet can flush,
whether or not you can have a gas stove.
Well, yeah, you believe that that's what the founding generation intended. I challenge you to go read anything written by any founding father, including Hamilton, even Hamilton, and show me where you think that they would approve of the government that we have today. And look, I'm not on here tonight, getting into a political discussion and necessarily coming in and citing corrections for the existing government. What I'm on here, that's up to you to take what I've said and what Connor said as how you will. The point that I want to drive across tonight is that what our ancestors, what our Confederate ancestors fought to prevent, and I can't remember who it was, but think about this, because this is a good, we've been on here close to an hour. This is a good end note. But in 1859, 1860, the only contact you would have had with the federal government would have been at the post office. That's it. Today, they touch every aspect of your life. And here's another one. I do recall who this one was from. This was from Jeffrey Rogers Hummel. And the excellent book, by the way, Emancipating Slaves, Enslaving Free Men. And he pointed out that federal expenditures in 1859 added up to about $2.90 per American citizen, per person throughout the Union, okay? In today's dollars, that would be, the last time I checked, is probably in about 2010 dollars, okay? It was around $70 or $71 per person. What is the actual tax burden? It's in the tens of thousands. Somebody out there will know the answer to this, but it is well beyond $70 a person, which it would have been prior to 1859 in today's dollars, going by the rate of inflation. Okay. But you come into this world, a child born today comes into this world, tens of thousands of dollars in debt. If you want to know the real fruits of Southern defeat, that's it. Not just money, but control of what you know, control of information, education, the news media, the corporatist system, where you've got corporate entities the government can regulate competition out of the marketplace. You are dominated everywhere you turn in your day-to-day life. You run into federal authority. And that's what the Southern soldier fought to prevent. Every American who's truly an American should revere the Confederate soldier, period.
Yeah. Carl, let me correct one little thing or expand one little thing. The U.S. public debt per capita is at 93,98,000.
Well, there you go. That's a long way from $2.90.
Yeah. Which, let me just, because this only goes back to only goes back 100 years. If you look at that for inflation, that should only, if it just followed the inflation rate, that should only be about $90.
There you go. There you go. You know, and the other thing I want to say on this, on secession, people want to say it was an act of war when the South seceded. No, it was not. It was an act of peace. If you look around the world throughout world history, whenever you had factions that disagreed on how government should run, what did they generally do? They went to war. And look at the French Revolution, for example, which is what was carried out here in the 1860s. It was, and it's going on today, a French Revolution of sorts. But you had opposing factions that were vying militarily and combatively for the control, bloodshed, violence, ruination, and all these things to take control over the federal government. Or of a central government, whatever the form of government, whatever country we may be speaking of, you know, whatever form of it may have been. The South decided, look, y'all go your way and have your central Leviathan, and we'll go our way and go back to what the founders actually ratified. Not only was it not treasonous, it was not an act of war. It was an act of peace. It was an attempt to peacefully part ways from a government that they no longer believed represented them, and for good reason.
Right. Well, it's just like President Davis said, all we ask is to be let alone. But I would think a more accurate viewing of where we are now is the Weimar Republic and post World War I Germany, before and during the rise of Nazi Germany. You know, we had people who disagreed with, you know, things were upset, things were turbulent. People disagreed on what way Germany needed to go. And, you know, you had different factions like you're talking about fighting, until finally one faction grew so much that it was able to defeat all the other factions through political coercion or actual physical violence or something like that. And then suddenly you get this, you know, crazy socialist trying to be imperial world domination force. Stop me when this is sounding too familiar to where we are right now.
Except even Germany wasn't trying to dominate the world. They were trying to dominate Europe.
Right. But, you know, still, at least their sphere of influence, if we're looking at area, we've grown to the point where, you know, the number of bases on foreign soil is just way too much. Digress. I mean, but it's the same thing where we are now.
Absolutely. And Washington and I'll end it with this because I got to get going. I've got to get these ribs off the smoker. But Washington dedicated about roughly 1/3, and I encourage everybody to go out and read this. His 1796 farewell address, which, by the way, was written by Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, but he dedicated approximately 1/3 of that address to the American people, to not getting to the folly of foreign entanglements and getting ourselves involved in foreign conflict. And what have we done? Again, that was coming from the Southern perspective. Live and let live. Hey, look, I don't care what you do over on your property. Just let my family and us live the way we want to. And what we embarked on post-Lincoln was the Puritan, edict of, hey, we need to force our views on everybody for their own good.
Right. Well, and it goes, the
You're
whole.
right, Zach.
Well, I'm just going to end it with this. But that whole Gilded Age philosophy of it being the white man's burden, like I believe it was Kipling that wrote that, where Teddy Roosevelt and his Great White Fleet, the expansion from, especially under the Roosevelt administration, Woodrow Wilson, with World War II, stopping from this almost isolationist, or at worst case scenario, Monroe Doctrine viewpoint, and then began getting into other world imperialism, for a lack of a better term, to cut to the chase. Doctrine that we have now is just, definitely not what the founders wanted. Guys, I hope you have enjoyed, on behalf of Carl, because he's going to flip ribs. Hope you have enjoyed tonight's episode. Just like every other episode from this season, our episode is brought to you by the Kennedy twins and their most recent book, Jefferson Davis and the High Road to Emancipation and Constitutional Government. You can get a copy at most bookstores. You can go to kennedytwins.com, take you a link to buy one there. You can also go to scv.org and get one, or from visitbovard.org and their gift shop. Moose, I believe, will be back on Thursday. Moose, I know you're still watching because you were just commenting 9 minutes ago. If he's not, I'll be on Thursday. Remember to send in all your news and such to scvyouthOutreach@gmail.com. Send us some pictures of what your camp is up to. Guys, it is summertime. Not officially. We got 2 more days until summer. So definitely get out there and do stuff. Get out in your communities. Remember, what is most important right now is for us to think locally and act locally, and vote Southern. But that's my viewpoint and opinion. Again, Moose will be on at 7 p.m., same SCV chat channel. I'll probably jump on because we've got something that we're getting ready to launch here in the next little bit that we need your help with. Remember, if you haven't signed up, go to scvchat.com, sign up. We've got something also on Thursday that we will be announcing. So, guys, hope you enjoyed it. Remember, in the words of the late, great Harold Philpotts, no Fumar in the elevator and Rudder